Hi, welcome back to another episode of Thicc Nonficc, where the band breaks up, everything's broken. It's 1970, and we hate everything. Yes, we have reached the end of The Beatles by Bob Spitz. We have traversed all 860 pages, and boy, was it worth it. This was such a tremendous experience. I'm already looking forward to rereading it, but we gotta pace ourselves. All right, so it's 1969. It's 1970. John has just had a practice round of divorcing things by splitting up with his wife Cynthia, and he is kind of keen on breaking up the band too after the experience of the White Album, which is such a disparate mishmash of tastes, artists, and directions. It's no surprise that recording Abbey Road was a very stressful experience, and it's no wonder that Let It Be is a cobbled together mishmash of music that they're like, we're done. Yeah, so John and Cynthia get divorced. John is in a relationship with Yoko now. And how do we feel about Yoko? Honestly, here are my thoughts on Yoko. I believe Yoko is very similar to John Lennon in that they are both very temperamental, artistic people. I think they could have been great collaboration partners, but together they had too many self-destructive tendencies to make their relationship not toxic. I have nothing to compare it to. The book doesn't paint a very flattering picture of her, but it also doesn't paint a very flattering picture of John while he's on heroin and LSD either. So they're not a healthy combo. I think they loved each other. I won't argue that either of them didn't love the other, but I think they were not a healthy combination. That's the idea that she broke up the band, totally false. Any criticism that is levied against her because she's a woman or Japanese, or even just because she's a weird artist, I don't think that's really valid. Her art's kind of a meme too. Like I was reading about some of her art, and she's kind of a meme. Like in 1960, no one would have liked that, but we appreciate the meme. Yoko kind of inserted herself into a lot of the recording process, and John let her or encouraged her to do so, and he took offense to the band having problems with that, which didn't help. But again, that's on John not communicating with his bandmates, and I'm not going to put that on Yoko at all. Could she be obnoxious? Yes. I've heard those excerpts. I've heard those bloopers. She was very obnoxious in the studio.
John! John! John!
He's busy!
People who think she broke up the band, those fractures were there as early as Sgt. Pepper. And really they were there as early as kind of Beatlemania kind of slowed to a stop, because there's a huge question of who are you after you don't want to be the iconic version of you. When you're kind of treading new ground to be an artist, that's a really testy territory. And I think as people solidify themselves as artists, that was going to take the band in different directions anyway. And so the breakup was kind of bound to happen because the individual members as musicians had different directions they wanted their music to go to. Paul wanted broad. He wanted such broad, beautiful appeal. John wanted very niche, avant-garde stuff. George wanted to go forward. He wanted to make very complex, beautiful music. Ringo wanted to play drums. He wanted to have fun, and his music reflects that. And so while this book ends with the breakup, you can see just it kind of needed to happen. It sucks that it did, and it sucks that it happened the way that it did, because boy was that a mess. But it did need to happen. It had to. A, they couldn't be what the brand wanted them to be for forever. B, their music tastes and their music ambitions were getting so broad and disparate. There was no way they were going to stay a cohesive whole forever. Someone was going to be in charge. Paul was totally fine doing that. John resented that, but John was too busy doing heroin and watching TV to really take any initiative. I can see why it happens, but it still stings. I found myself being really sad. Like, Paul's reaction to the band breaking up, he's like trying to cling to everyone, like, no, we can do it. We just have to tour again. Please stay here. All right. So let me break down this bit of drama. This is the bit of drama I will break down. So the band is breaking up, but it's very hush-hush. No one knows anything about the band breaking up. John has decided it's going to happen. Ringo and George are like, yeah, okay. It's really just Paul who doesn't want it to happen. But the band quietly breaks up. They go and they start doing their own thing. Paul records an album by himself separately, and he wants to release it. But the band still has one more album that needs to come out. And Paul's album was going to come out before the Beatles' last album, and they couldn't let that happen. The way they were going to let Paul release his album beforehand is if he signed over management of the Beatles to a guy that Paul didn't like because he had someone else in mind he wanted to manage the Beatles, but the other Beatles were like, no, we want this guy to manage the band. And Paul was like, I don't care, I'm in Scotland, I can't hear you, la la la. So the Beatles were like, no. Other Beatles, meaning John, George, and Ringo, were like, no, you have to sign over management or you can't release your album beforehand. So they send the sweetest, gentlest, softest Beatle to go and tell Paul how this is gonna work. And poor Ringo has to deal with Paul spewing all of the poison and bitterness and hurt that he had been holding in his soul from this. And so he's like, fine. Paul signs over management, which means he can release his album first. And Paul pulls the old, you can't break up the band, I quit, and releases that with his album. And so it's not the band breaks up, the message becomes Paul leaves the Beatles. And it's the most dramatic move I've ever encountered. Oh, there's so much bitterness and hurt there. It just, it hurts my soul. But it was such a worthwhile read. And the music has been fantastic. I also now own the White Album and Abbey Road, which have some great tracks. I really liked the White Album. I wasn't sure how I would feel about it because it's kind of all over the place, but it's got some bangers. Like, I know Obla Di Obla Da is kind of seen as like a dumb song, but goodness, if it isn't the biggest bop in music history, when those honky-tonk pub pianos go, I just lose it. This has been such a tremendous experience. I'll have one more video after this one that kind of like decompresses, if my ranking of the band changes, if it affects how I view them as individuals and things like that. And this has been a really fun experience. I enjoy reading big nonfiction and dense nonfiction like this that goes very in-depth into something like this, because maybe it's just because I haven't read a ton of biographies like this, but it feels like there aren't many biographies that cover a wide scope, but a very specific scope of time. Because it seems like if we're going to do a biography, we have to cover all of the years. But this one is a very narrow view, because the band didn't even last a full decade, really. At least not the lineup that we know of it. The lineup we know, that's 7 or 8 years. But so much history was made there, and I'm so excited to do more with this, to really get into it more. I'm planning on researching more about the individual members, and what I want to do is in 2021 do like their story is told by me, because I want to go more in depth with the individuals, with the albums, with the history that surrounds them too. And I want to make it like a big thing, because I still really like it, and I'm still going to talk about it because I have to have an outlet for this. Thank you for joining me on this journey of Thicc Nonficc. We will definitely do this again. Maybe not even during the summer again. Maybe we'll do it in the fall at some point. I don't know. But let me know if you started listening to the band, if you've listened to the band at all, if you're considering getting the book. I heard from my boyfriend that he has family members who are getting the book because of me, and that makes me happy. So yeah, if you're going to get the book, I highly recommend finding it used if you can, because I paid like $8 for that. Big nonfiction like that usually runs $30, $35. So I recommend finding it cheap if you can, but it is so worth it, especially if you can listen to it at the same time. This has been so much fun. I cannot emphasize that enough. But thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I love the boys. Love you. Have a wonderful evening, and I will see you next time.